$9 billion in debt, $12 million in cash. That was the balance sheet of First Brands Group on the day it filed for bankruptcy. $9 billion owed, $12 million in the bank. That is not a rounding error. That is the gap a man drove a fleet of supercars through. Tonight, where the other $8.9 billion went, and why the man who built this empire was buying a $23 million Malibu mansion while the factories that made his money went dark. You have never heard the name First Brands, but you know its products: FRAM oil filters, Raybestos brakes, Typo windshield wipers, Autolite spark plugs, the parts in half the cars in America. Patrick James spent 30 years quietly buying up the most trusted names in your engine bay. Then he allegedly sold the same invoices 2 and 3 times over to Jefferies, to UBS, to BlackRock. He left them holding $2.7 billion in receivables for sales that never happened. And when it all collapsed in September 2025, 1,200 Ohio workers lost their jobs. This is the story of who got rich when First Brands died. It started, like a lot of American fortunes, quietly. Patrick James was born in Malaysia. He came to Ohio for college, to the College of Worcester, and he stayed. In the 1990s, he started buying small manufacturers through a holding company called Crown Group. Nothing flashy. Brake parts, filters, the unglamorous guts of the automobile. Then he started rolling them up. In 2014, Crown bought Typo, the windshield wiper company. That was the anchor. In 2019 came FRAM, the orange oil filter you've seen on 1,000 shelves. Autolite, Raybestos, Carter, Cardone, around 24 brands in all. In 2020, he tied them together under a single name, First Brands Group. On paper, it was a $5 billion a year giant, one of the largest auto parts suppliers in the world. And here is the thing you need to understand. The business was real. The factories were real. The filters and the brakes rolled off real assembly lines in Ohio and got bolted onto real cars. That is what made the next part work. Because First Brands did not grow on profits. It grew on invoices. Let me explain how that works, because it is the whole story. When a giant company like First Brands sells parts to an auto chain, the chain does not always pay right away. It might pay in 60 or 90 days. So First Brands is owed money. That promise of future payment is called a receivable. And on Wall Street, you can sell a receivable. And on Wall Street, you can sell a receivable. You go to a lender and say, customers owe me $100 million, give me $90 million now, and you collect the 100 later. That is called factoring. It is normal, boring even. Patrick James turned it into a weapon. Because a receivable is just a piece of paper that says money is coming. And paper can be faked. According to federal prosecutors, First Brands generated invoices for transactions that never happened. It took real invoices and inflated the numbers. And then it did the thing that turns a fraud into a machine. It took the same receivable, the same promise of the same dollar, and it sold it to more than one lender at the same time. Double-pledged. Triple-bedged. The same $100, sold 3 times to 3 different banks, none of whom knew the other 2 existed. Picture a man with 1 used car and 3 buyers. He takes a deposit from all 3, promising each of them the same vehicle. For a while, nobody notices because nobody comes to pick up the car. He just keeps taking deposits. That is the trick, scaled to $9 billion and run through some of the largest financial institutions on the planet. The car was a receivable. The deposits were loans. And the man kept finding new buyers to pay off the old ones. On top of that, prosecutors say, the company hid the scale of it. Roughly $2.3 billion in factoring obligations. Another $800 million in supply chain financing. Kept off the visible balance sheet, where lenders could not see how much was really owed. To the outside world, First Brands looked like a thriving, growing global business. Underneath, it was a house of cards held up by paper that did not exist, and this was not happening in some shady back alley of finance. It was happening at the center of one of the biggest booms of the decade. Private credit, the business of giant funds lending directly to companies, had exploded into a multi-trillion-dollar industry, hungry for yield, competing to put money to work. First Brands was exactly the kind of borrower that machine loved. Real factories, famous brands, a steady stream of invoices to lend against. The hunger to lend is precisely what made it so easy to fool the lenders. So where did the money go? This is the part that matters. This is why we are here. Because while the factories ran and the workers clocked in, the cash flowed out the back door. According to the company's own lawsuit and reporting by Fortune and Bloomberg, Patrick James diverted around $700 million out of First Brands between 2018 and 2025. Not into the business, into himself. A $23 million mansion in Malibu, bought in 2019, a home in the Hamptons, a New York townhouse with $3 million in rent, 17 exotic cars, a private celebrity chef, $500,000, a personal trainer in the six figures, a 6-week hotel stay that ran over $100,000. The money allegedly moved through a web of accounts, including an entity called Battery Park Holdings that mixed company cash and personal spending until you could not tell where one ended and the other began. Think about the symmetry of it. The company was selling invoices for sales that never happened, and the founder was living a life the company could not actually afford. Both were fiction. Both were funded by the same lenders, who thought they were backing brake pads and oil filters, and it went on for years. That is the detail that should stop you. This was not a single bad quarter, a panicked decision in a crisis. According to the company's own account, the diversions ran from 2018 all the way to 2025. 7 years. 7 years of someone, somewhere, signing off on the transfers. 7 years of audits and board meetings and lender reviews while hundreds of millions of dollars moved out of an auto parts company and into mansions and supercars. A fraud that survives that long is not the work of one rogue actor in a back office. It is a culture. It is a lot of people deciding over and over not to ask the obvious question about where the money was going. For a while, it worked. It worked because everyone was getting paid just enough. The lenders collected their fees. The factories kept humming. The brands kept selling. As long as new money kept coming in to cover the old promises, the machine ran. That is the definition of every house of cards. It does not fall because it gets weaker. It falls the moment new money stops. In the summer and fall of 2025, new money stopped. The cracks showed first in the most boring place imaginable. A lender doing the math on its receivables, noticing that the same collateral seemed to be backing more than one loan. Then another lender. Then the questions started, and the questions did not have good answers. By September 2025, the factoring obligations alone had ballooned past $2 billion, and the people holding the paper began to realize they were all holding claims on the same handful of dollars. On September 24th and 28th, 2025, First Brands Group and more than 75 affiliated companies filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the Southern District of Texas. And the number that came out of that filing stopped Wall Street cold. Over $9 billion in liabilities, $12 million in cash. Counting the hidden off-balance sheet debt, the whole may have been as large as $11.5 billion. And then the receivables. Lenders went looking for the money they were owed, and discovered that roughly $2.7 billion of it was backed by accounts receivable that simply did not exist, sales that never happened, invoices for ghosts. The scramble was ugly. Jefferies, through an investment fund called Point Bonita, had something like $715 million of exposure and disclosed a $30 million loss. UBS, through its O'Connor unit, was in for over $500 million. BlackRock and Morgan Stanley held the rest of the bag. These are not small, naive players. These are some of the most sophisticated lenders on earth, and they all got taken by the same trick. The same invoice sold twice. But the lenders in the end can absorb it. They have other funds, other deals, other quarters. The people who could not absorb it were in Ohio. When the Vaughan notices went out, the human cost came into focus. More than 1,200 jobs across the state. The Cleveland headquarters. A TMD plant in Bowling Green. Another in Tiffin. The FRAM facility in Greenville. People who made the actual parts, who had nothing to do with the paper games on Wall Street, who showed up and did the work, and who lost their jobs because the man at the top had been hollowing out the company they kept running. The bankruptcy court did what it does. It appointed an examiner with a budget of several $1 million just to map how the factoring and the off-balance sheet deals actually worked, because even the professionals could not untangle it at a glance. Some pieces of the empire were sold off. A unit called Walbro found a buyer, which saved around 600 jobs. But that is the cruel arithmetic of a collapse like this. Saving 600 jobs counts as a good day because the baseline is total loss. The brands themselves, FRAM and Raybestos and the rest, will probably survive in some form under new owners because the products were always real. The thing that died was the trust that held the financing together. The reckoning came fast. In November 2025, First Brands, now under new management, sued its own founder for what it called grievous misconduct, accusing Patrick James of looting the company. In January 2026, a finance executive named Peter Brumbergs pleaded guilty and began cooperating with prosecutors. And on January 28th and 29th, 2026, Patrick James and his brother Edward were indicted in New York on 9 counts, including running a continuing financial crimes enterprise, bank fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering conspiracy. Their trial is set to begin in July 2026. They are presumed innocent, and they will have their day in court. But step back and look at what this story actually tells you, not about one man, about the system around him. Because Patrick James did not pull this off alone, in the dark. He did it inside one of the most heavily financed corners of modern capitalism, the world of private credit, where giant funds lend billions against assets they often never physically inspect. The same invoice was sold to multiple lenders because no one was checking whether the first sale had already happened. The fraud worked because the people whose entire job was to manage risk were, allegedly, looking at paper and trusting it. This is the part that should bother you. We are told that this corner of Wall Street is run by adults, sophisticated, careful, fee-earning professionals who price risk for a living. And a man bought 17 supercars and a Malibu mansion by selling them invoices for sales that never happened, for years before anyone did the arithmetic. So who got rich when First Brands collapsed? For a time, Patrick James did. He got the mansion, the cars, the chef. The lenders got years of interest and fees on a machine they did not understand, right up until it blew up in their faces. And who paid? 1,200 workers in Ohio who made the brakes and the filters. And the strange, quiet truth underneath all of it: the parts were always real. The company was always real. The only thing that was fake was the money. And by the time anyone noticed, the founder was in Malibu, and the workers were holding pink slips, and there were $9 billion owed against $12 million in the bank. That is the gap. That is the whole story. Remember, the next time someone tells you the smart money always knows what it is doing,